Hi, my name is Charlotte, and this channel is about my attempt to become moderately competent at drawing. This week, I'm going to be talking to you about my further adventures in figure drawing. If you'd like to see my previous installments on this topic, I've put them in a playlist, which I'll link down below. Over the last 4 weeks, I've been working on 4 different things with varying levels of intensity. First of all, drawing the figure using simple volumes. Secondly, continuing to practice my gesture drawing. Third, drawing longer and more finished drawings, and related to that, I spent a little bit of time thinking about how to shade my more finished drawings. So let's start with the topic I spent the most time on, which is learning to draw the figure with simple volumes. This is an exercise you will see recommended everywhere, this kind of approach where you turn the figure into a kind of robot person with the torso made up of boxes or sometimes egg shapes and the limbs represented by cylinders in perspective. I can't say I've ever been super attracted to this as an exercise, but I kept running across these videos where people were saying like, oh, if there's an exercise you've been avoiding, it's probably the one you most need to do. So I took that as a sign that it was my time to start really trying to work on this exercise and drawing the figure with simple volumes. So the approach that I took was that every day that I practiced, I would start by drawing, say, half a dozen gestures, taking 30 seconds to 1 minute, and then I would go back and overlay each of those gestures with simple volumes to represent the different parts of the figure. So this was a useful exercise, a way to kind of double up my time. Most of the time, the gesture disappears beneath the subsequent volume drawing, but I did do one set where I did the initial gesture with a marker so that you could actually see what I did. I started out the month working on fairly simple poses where there isn't too much foreshortening or overlapping of the body parts, and then about halfway through the month moved on specifically to work on those more difficult poses where the model is reaching towards or away from the viewer. There's a lot of overlapping, so the pelvis is hidden behind the ribcage or vice versa, in order to really get to grips with those types of poses as well. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with my progress on this. By the end of the month, in the last few days, I've been focusing exclusively on the most difficult foreshortened poses that I could find. I really started to feel like I got to grips with how to use these simple volumes to represent these really complicated poses that I have always struggled with in the past. I didn't always think that I exactly captured the pose or the foreshortening, but I definitely took a step towards being able to. I feel like having done this fairly intensive practice has really helped my shorter gesture drawings because it's made me much more confident about finding and representing the main volumes of the body. However, looking back over the month, there are a few things that I don't think that I did particularly well. The first is that I think I got pretty good by the end, particularly with very simple poses of creating these little robot people out of shapes, but I don't think I'd spent enough time working out how I was going to translate what I learned into figures that look like actual people. So that's something I still need to work on. I'm also still making some really consistent errors, and the 2 places where I see the most errors are when the limb is very foreshortened, like an arm is reaching towards you. I'm still tending to make the limbs too long. And when the torso is in a really complex position, like it's twisting and bending towards the camera, I really struggle to get the volumes the right shape. But I think those are really common problems for somebody at my level. So I'm not really beating myself up about that because I think a lot of people have those problems, and it's something that only time and practice will really get me past making those mistakes. One thing that I didn't explore that I had meant to was poses where the camera is, or the viewer, is significantly above or below the figure. And I didn't really do that, partly because I ran out of time, but partly because I couldn't really find any really compelling reference images for this. There are a few on Croquis Cafe, but they didn't really grab me, and a lot of them are very, very similar. I did find a pack on Graphite or Graphite Studio, I'm not sure how they pronounce that, but by the time I found it, it was almost the end of the month and I had already blown through my entire art budget, so I didn't buy it on this occasion. That is something I do want to come back to though, this idea of drawing poses where the camera is at a very different angle and not simply at eye level with the model. So in conclusion, I didn't really want to do this exercise when I first started. I kind of begrudgingly put it on my schedule. But once I got started, I realized how incredibly useful it was. So I guess kudos to all those people in random videos I watched who said, the exercise you don't want to do is the one that you should be doing, because I think I really did need to do this, and I'm really glad that I did. So if you need a sign to go and do the exercise that you've been avoiding because you don't really want to, this is it for you. My second topic area this month was gesture drawing, and as I mentioned, I did quite a lot of untimed gestures as a part of that volume drawing practice. But I also managed to squeeze in some time working specifically on improving my gesture drawing. And once again, I was focusing pretty closely on the shortest gestures of 30 to 60 seconds. I think I'm still going to need a lot more time and practice to actually get good at this and see some real improvement. But I did have one breakthrough this month. I was about to sit down and do some 30-second gesture drawings, but I sat back and asked myself, what is going to make this practice different from my previous practices during that week? Because simply doing the same thing over and over didn't really seem to be getting me anywhere. And what I realized as I flipped back through my previous pages of drawings was that I had pretty much been asking myself very consistently, how much can I draw in 30 seconds? I decided to approach that day differently. I wrote down a list of what do I want to draw in 30 seconds? What is my list of things that I think are important to capture in this shortest gesture that I practice? So I wrote down my list, and then I did kind of reverse timed gestures, which is to say I looked at a model, I drew what I thought I wanted to draw with a timer going to see how long that took me. And my idea was that obviously if it was consistently taking me 45, 50 seconds to do that drawing, I was expecting too much of myself. I was not going to be able to draw that in an unhurried, unpanicked way in 30 seconds. And vice versa. Obviously, if I was only taking 20 seconds, I wasn't being ambitious enough. So I did quite a few of those, about 10, and I averaged right around the 28 to 30 seconds with that short list of things that I absolutely wanted to hit. And this also gave me a list of priorities. So one thing that I've discovered about myself is that I really like to draw in the feet, because even if my legs are only sticks, having the feet in indicates what direction the legs are rotated in. So I really like to put the feet in. But I know now that if I want to do an unhurried, unpanicked gesture in 30 seconds, and the pose is really complicated, it's twisting or heavily foreshortened, I'm probably not going to have time for feet if I'm going to get the volumes of the torso in correctly. So that's been really, really helpful. I don't think that you're going to look at my gesture drawings from this month and go, oh, that's a huge breakthrough. But I think each of these little changes in mindset will gradually add up to something. Over the next month, I'm going to start looking at each of the time periods I typically draw, so 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, and so on, and come up with a similar list. So that's kind of a long-term plan. I'm going to continue to work on that over the next few months. So there were a couple of other things that I spent a lot less time on. If you watch my last video, which was my 200 hours of practice video, you'll know that up to now, when I've been comparing my progress over 0, 100, and 200 hours, I've always used a pretty complete and finished drawing in order to do that. But as the last few minutes of video suggests, I don't actually spend a lot of time practicing doing more finished, shaded drawings. So I decided to make that be a kind of low-key part of my practice. And I decided that once a week, usually Sunday afternoons, I will sit down and do a single longer pose where I take, say, 30 to 40 minutes, and I try to do a more complete and finished drawing. So here are the ones I've done so far. Obviously, there's only a handful because I only do this once a week. But this is a practice where I think if I keep going with it, I will hope to see my other practice start to feed into making these better. Related to this, I also watched the last series of videos in the Art and Science of Figure Drawing series on Skillshare. I've mentioned these classes before. I've done several of them in the past. This is really kind of the last one in this series, and it was really helpful. I did one drawing using this knowledge. It did not turn out well, but at least I have a bit more knowledge behind me. I have some ideas and a process behind me that were taught in this course, which is more than I've had to date. I would say overall, I've had a really productive month. I think it's really important when you're at this level of expertise to separate out experiencing a really good month in terms of what you've learned and the processes that you've followed and the work that you've done against the kind of outcomes, which stay really pretty rubbish looking. There's nothing objectively good about my outcome drawings, but I hugely enjoyed this month. I got a huge amount out of it, and I felt like a really good learning experience, which is what I'm looking for. It also helped me pinpoint what I really need to do next. As I was working through doing these gestures and these volume drawings, I realized that I just have a giant void where my understanding of the actual human body is. So right now I think I'm pretty good at drawing like volumes and stick people and robot people, but I'm not at all good at drawing people that look like people. And in order to get there, what I've decided to do is start looking at each segment of the body in turn in order to get a better idea of how to draw the contours and cross contours and the lumps and bumps of the anatomy much more effectively. So I'm going to start next month by looking at the torso and trying to learn at least the basics of the torso anatomy for both male and female models. So we'll be back in about a month with the results of that to show you. And in the meantime, next week, I'm going to come back and talk to you about how my attempt to learn to digital paint with color has gone over the last month as well. So for now, I hope you have a great creative week, and I will see you next weekend. Bye for now.